Nothing about that Saturday morning felt like it needed remembering. That's what gets me now, looking back. I've replayed it so many times I could tell you the exact color of the sky, and none of it looked like the beginning of anything. My name is Walter Grady, 68 years old, spent 34 years running heavy equipment and then a small excavation company out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, before I sold it and let myself finally slow down. I've got a house on Terwilliger Boulevard my late wife Marion picked out in 1994, and I still can't bring myself to change the wallpaper in the hallway. I don't go looking for trouble. I never have. And on the second Saturday of March, my granddaughter called and asked if I'd come stay with them for a week while she and her husband dealt with a plumbing disaster in their basement. That's it. That's the whole beginning. A week. A favor. Family. Helping family. Welcome to the channel, by the way, if you're new here. I tell these stories the way they happened, no embellishment, because the truth doesn't need any help standing on its own. Stick around, because this one's going to test what you think you know about the people closest to you. My granddaughter Paige called me on a Wednesday. I was on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching a woodpecker work over the dead elm at the property line, when my phone lit up on the railing. Grandpa Walt. Paige, quick and warm the way she's always been since she was small. You busy? Retired busy, I said, which is to say, not busy. She laughed. Good, because I need a favor. Our basement flooded some pipe behind the water heater just let go, and we've got contractors coming in and out for the next week, maybe 10 days. Derek's swamped at work, and I don't want to leave the house unattended with strangers walking through it all day. You want me to babysit your basement, I said. I want you to babysit us, she said, and I could hear the smile in it. Come stay a week. I'll cook. You can finally see the new place properly. Derek's been asking about you too. I hadn't seen much of Derek since the wedding, if I'm honest. Paige had married him 3 years back, a soft-spoken man, worked in something to do with insurance claims, always polite, always a little careful around me in a way I chalked up to nerves around a father-in-law figure. Paige's own father, my son Michael, passed when she was 19, heart attack at 44, and I'd stepped into whatever gap that left the best a grieving old man could. Paige was Marion's whole heart before Marion passed too. She was mine now. I'll pack a bag, I said. I want you to sit with that decision for a second, because everything after it makes so much more sense once you understand there was no hesitation in me at all. This was my granddaughter. This was easy. I drove up to their place in Broken Arrow that Friday afternoon, a 2-story craftsman with a wraparound porch that Paige had clearly poured her whole heart into flower boxes, a porch swing, one of those little painted signs by the door that said, "Welcome, y'all." Derek met me at the door in a flannel shirt, shook my hand with both of his. "Walt, good to see you. Come on in, come in." The house smelled like fresh paint and, underneath it, faintly like standing water from the basement, a smell they hadn't fully aired out yet. Paige hugged me, the way she always does, arms tight around my neck like she's still 9 years old. "You look thin," she said, which is what she always says, and what I always say back is that I'm saving room for her cooking. They'd set me up in the guest room on the ground floor, which I appreciated. My knees aren't what they were, and stairs at night have become something of a production. The room had a good reading lamp, fresh sheets, a little dish of peppermints on the nightstand that touched me more than I let on. That first night, we sat on the back patio with beers. Well, a beer for Derek, iced tea for me, doctor's orders since my blood pressure scare 2 winters back, and Derek talked about work, about a hunting trip he was planning for the fall, about how much he was looking forward to having the basement mess behind them. Paige teased him about his snoring. It was, plainly and simply, a good evening. I went to bed feeling lighter than I had in months. That particular contentment of being wanted, of being useful to people you love. I mention all of this because I need you to understand there was no version of that Friday night where I would have believed what was coming. The contractors showed up Saturday morning at 8 sharp, 3 men in Carhartts hauling a wet vac and lengths of PVC down into the basement, and the house filled with the particular chaos of a home mid-repair banging, the smell of cut plastic, Paige apologizing to me twice for the noise, like I hadn't spent 3 decades on job sites louder than this. I stayed out of the way, sat in the living room with the newspaper, made myself useful by keeping the coffee pot going for the workers. Derek left for the office around 9, kissed Paige on the temple, told me to make myself at home like I owned the place. Paige spent the morning ferrying coffee and answering the contractor's questions, and generally running herself ragged, being a good hostess to men tearing up her basement floor. Around 11, she came and sat next to me on the couch, looking tired in that specific way of someone who's been performing calm all morning. "You doing okay, Grandpa? I feel like I've barely said 2 words to you since you got here." "I'm having a wonderful time watching other people work," I said, and she laughed, really laughed. And, for a second, she looked exactly like her father had at that age, same crease at the corner of the eyes. "I got you something," she said suddenly, standing up and going to the kitchen. She came back with a small brown glass dropper bottle, the kind you'd expect to find essential oils in. "Don't roll your eyes yet. Just hear me out." "I'm not rolling anything," I said, though I probably was, a little. "My friend Colleen's been seeing this wellness coach, not a doctor. I know how that sounds, and she got me looking into this stuff for joint inflammation. It's this magnesium and trace mineral blend, totally plant-based, no drug interactions, nothing weird. Colleen swears it's helped her mother's arthritis more than anything her actual rheumatologist prescribed." She turned the bottle over in her hands. "I know you've been complaining about your knee. I worry about you rattling around that house by yourself, Grandpa. I wanted to bring you something. Now, I want to be honest with you here, because honesty is the whole point of these stories. I have opinions about supplements. 34 years of running crews taught me to be suspicious of anything that promises a miracle in a dropper bottle. But I looked at my granddaughter's face, genuinely earnest, genuinely worried about an old man's knee, and I felt something in my chest loosen a little. This was Marion's granddaughter, through and through. Marion used to bring home every herbal tea and copper bracelet some magazine promised would fix my back. "A few drops," Paige said. "In water, twice a day. It's completely mild. I've been taking it myself for 2 weeks." I looked at the label. Botanical blend, magnesium, something called devil's claw extract, distilled water. Nothing that raised any alarm in me. My granddaughter had thought of me. That was the whole of it, as far as I was concerned. "All right," I said. "For you, I'll try it." She measured out 10 drops into a glass of water herself, right there at the kitchen counter, careful and precise the way she used to measure ingredients for the cookies we'd baked together when she was small, tongue between her teeth with concentration. I drank it. It tasted like nothing at all, just water with the faintest bitter edge underneath. "There," she said, pleased. "That wasn't so bad." It wasn't. I want you to remember that. Nothing about that moment felt like anything other than a granddaughter fussing over her grandfather. The contractors broke for lunch, the house went quiet, and Paige made sandwiches while I sat at the kitchen table reading the sports section. It was maybe 40 minutes later that I first noticed my mouth had gone dry, unusually dry, like cotton had been packed behind my teeth. I reached for my iced tea and noticed my hand felt a half-second slow, like the signal from my brain had to travel a longer road than usual to get there. "You all right, Grandpa? You've gone quiet." "Fine," I said, just feeling my age a little. I smiled at her, and she smiled back, and went on buttering bread. But it didn't pass. If anything, it deepened a strange warmth that turned to a strange chill, a faint metallic taste sitting at the back of my tongue like I'd been sucking on an old penny. I told myself it was low blood sugar. I told myself it was the excitement of the trip, an old man's body protesting a change in routine. "I'm going to go lie down a few minutes," I said. "Long drive yesterday. I think it's catching up to me." "Of course. Holler if you need anything." I went to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, and it was there, alone, with the noise of the contractors starting back up downstairs, that I noticed my trousers pocket. I'd sat down harder than I meant to, and something crinkled against my hip. I dug it out without thinking much of it, expecting a receipt, a stick of gum. It was a torn foil blister pack. Half crushed, 3 of the little plastic domes punched empty, the clinical printed lettering of a prescription label running along the edge. It must have fallen from somewhere, and I'd sat on it, picked it up off the guest bed without noticing. Some carelessness of the contractors, maybe, tracked in from somewhere in the house. Someone's on medication and hasn't mentioned it to anyone, I thought. That was the whole of my thought in that moment, I promise you. The plain concern of a man who spent his whole life around crews and knows that people hide their health problems out of pride more often than not. I turned the pack over in my hand. Diphenhydramine scopolamine combination. A pharmacy name I didn't recognize, printed small along the seam. I want to be clear, the word scopolamine meant nothing to me in that moment. I was not alarmed. I was concerned the way you'd be concerned finding out anyone in a household you love was dealing with something quietly. Derek's back, maybe. Some sleep issue Paige hadn't mentioned. I took out my reading glasses and my phone, and because I am a man who likes to understand what he's looking at before he says anything to anyone, I typed the name into the search bar. The dry mouth, the metallic taste, the slowed hand. I read the first result. Then I read it again, sitting on the edge of a bed that wasn't mine, in a house that had felt, 20 minutes earlier, like the safest place in the world. Scopolamine used medically in small, monitored doses for motion sickness and pre-surgical purposes. Known for producing significant short-term memory, impairment, confusion, disorientation, and in elderly patients, particularly symptoms that closely mimic early-stage dementia. Contraindicated for use in older adults outside of strict clinical supervision. From downstairs I could hear Paige laughing at something one of the contractors said, ordinary, domestic. The house going on exactly as it had been 10 minutes before, except now something in me had gone very still and very cold. 10 drops, measured herself. Careful, precise, the way you'd measure something you needed exactly right. I sat there for what felt like a long time, turning the blister pack over and over in my fingers the way I used to turn over a piece of failed equipment on a job site, looking for the crack that told you where it had given way. I am not, by nature, a suspicious man. I have tried, my whole life, to give people the benefit of every doubt I can afford them. But I have also spent 34 years reading load and stress and knowing when something doesn't add up, and nothing about this added up. Maybe I sat on someone else's pill pack by pure accident, I told myself. Maybe the drops really were harmless and I was frightening myself over nothing with a bad internet search. I wanted, badly, for that to be true. I want you to understand that. I did not want to believe what I was starting to believe. I folded the blister pack carefully and slid it into my shirt pocket, and I walked back out to the kitchen and let Paige fuss over me and make me a sandwich, and I said nothing, because I didn't know yet. Not for certain, but something in that house had shifted for me, quietly and permanently, the way a foundation shifts a half-inch that nobody notices until the doors stop closing right. That night I lay awake in the guest room a long time, listening to the house settle, listening to Derek come home and the low murmur of their voices through the wall, and somewhere around midnight I got up as quiet as I could and I called my granddaughter Emma. Now, I should explain Emma is not my granddaughter by blood. She's Paige's cousin on her mother's side, raised close as sisters, and after Marion passed, Emma had become something like a second granddaughter to me, calling every Sunday, driving up from Kansas City twice a year to check on the old man. Emma is 31 and works as a fraud investigator for a regional bank, the kind of woman who reads contracts for pleasure and has never once in her life let a suspicious number slide past her without chasing it to ground. She picked up on the second ring, alert instantly, the way people who work nights sometimes are. "Uncle Walt, it's midnight, what's wrong? I need you to just listen," I said. "All the way through, before you say anything." I told her everything. The trip to Broken Arrow. The dropper bottle, 10 drops measured careful into a glass. The dry mouth, the metallic taste, the slowed hand. The blister pack I'd found in my own pocket, and what I'd read on my phone sitting on the edge of that guest bed. When I finished, there was a silence on the line long enough that I checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. "Emma, I'm here." Her voice had changed. Gone flat and careful in a way I recognized I'd heard that exact stillness in her once before. When she was 26 and had single-handedly unwound a fraud scheme at her own bank that implicated a senior vice president, methodical and merciless in a way that made grown men in suits go pale. "Uncle Walt, don't drink anything else from that bottle. Do you have it with you?" "It's here. Full bottle, minus what she's given me." "Sealed?" "Sealed." "Good. Don't touch it with your bare hands more than you have to. I need you to bag it a Ziploc, anything, and the blister pack too, and I need you to get it to me without Paige knowing. Emma, she's my granddaughter. There has to be an explanation." "There might be," Emma said, and her voice was gentle now. gentle in the way of someone delivering bad news to a man they love. I hope to God there is. But I need to know what's in that bottle before either of us says another word to her, and I need you somewhere safe while I figure it out. Can you get out of that house tomorrow without raising a flag? I thought about it, sitting in the dark of that guest room with the blister pack in my shirt pocket like a stone. I'll tell them I need to check on my own house. Mail the furnace, something. Do that. Come stay with me instead. Tell them it's easier since I'm not far. Tell them anything. Just get out and bring me everything. I did not sleep much that night. In the morning I told Paige, with what I hope was a convincing casualness, that I'd left the stove pilot light in a state that was bothering me, that I ought to run home and check on the house for a day or two while the worst of the contractor noise passed. She hugged me at the door, told me she loved me, told me to come back soon, and I stood on that porch with the welcome, y'all sign swinging gently in the wind and felt something crack quietly down the center of my chest. I drove the 2 hours to Emma's place outside Kansas City with the bottle and the blister pack wrapped in a grocery bag on the passenger seat like they might go off. Emma met me in her driveway before I'd even parked, and the hug she gave me was hard and long, the kind that carries more weight than words. "We're going to figure this out," she said into my shoulder. "I promise you that." She had a contact, a former colleague who now worked at an independent toxicology lab outside the city, someone who owed her a favor from an old case. She drove the bottle and blister pack over herself that same afternoon, wouldn't let me come, told me to sit tight, and let her handle logistics. I sat in her kitchen and drank coffee. I didn't taste and watched the clock like it owed me money. The results came back Wednesday morning. 4 days. 4 days that felt like 4 years. Emma sat across from me at her kitchen table, a manila folder in front of her that she hadn't opened yet. "I need you to brace yourself," she said. "Just tell me." The bottle is laced with a concentrated scopolamine compound, well above anything you'd find in even a legitimate prescription dose. The blister pack matches. It's the delivery form for the raw compound before it gets diluted into the drops. Someone made this themselves, Uncle Walt. Someone with access to the raw pharmaceutical and no oversight at all. She slid the report toward me. The lab's own notes flag it. Their exact words, consistent with a deliberate, sustained poisoning protocol. I sat with that phrase for a long moment. Deliberate, sustained, protocol. 10 drops, I said, more to myself than to her. Twice a day. She measured it herself. "There's more," Emma said, and I watched her steel herself before she went on. "I did some digging of my own while we waited on the lab. I have access to public filing databases through work habit. Mostly, I run background checks for a living. I searched your name. Someone requested a full asset and title report on your house on Terwilliger back in January. Not a bank, not a mortgage inquiry. It came through a probate attorney's office in Tulsa, a man named Gerald Voss. The name meant nothing to me. That was almost the worst part, that a stranger had been assembling a file on my life, my house, my 34 years of work, and I had never even heard his name. Who is he? I called a friend who practices elder law here in Kansas. Voss has a reputation, not a good one. He specializes in what's called predatory conservatorship. He finds families with an elderly relative who has significant assets, and he coaches the family quietly, carefully on how to build a paper trail of the relative's supposed decline. Medical visits, witnessed episodes, enough documentation that when they finally file for guardianship, a judge has no reason to doubt it. He's done this before, Uncle Walt, more than once. I thought of the house on Terwilliger, 31 years there. Marion's wallpaper in the hallway. I never could bring myself to change. The equipment company I'd built from a single rented backhoe into something I'd sold, at 63, for enough that I never had to worry about money again in my life, enough, I'd always assumed, to leave something real behind for Paige. "They wanted me declared incompetent," I said slowly, testing the shape of the words, "so they could take the house. The money. That's my read," Emma said. "And, Uncle Walt, I have to ask you something, and I need you to really think before you answer. Is there anyone else who's been around Paige and Derek recently? Anyone new in their lives? Anyone with money troubles?" I sat with that question a long time, and the longer I sat with it, the more one name kept surfacing, insistent as a splinter. "Derek's brother," I said finally. Cole. He moved in with them back in the fall. I remember Paige mentioning it on the phone. Said his construction job dried up. Said it was just temporary while he got back on his feet. He was there this weekend too, actually, helping with the basement. Emma's face went very still. Construction, she said. Someone who'd know how to source raw pharmaceutical compound, or at least know someone who could. I closed my eyes. The pieces were assembling themselves now with a horrible, mechanical inevitability, each one clicking into the next like something I'd built with my own hands, and was only now seeing the finished, terrible shape of. They bought him, I said quietly. That's often exactly how it works, Emma said. One person needs money badly enough to look past what they're being asked to do. Another person provides the professional structure, and the person closest to the target provides access. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Uncle Walt. I don't think Paige came up with this alone, but I need you to understand her hand poured that glass. Her hand measured those drops. Whatever her reasons, she was in the room. I did not cry in that kitchen, though I came closer to it than I had since Marion's funeral. What I felt instead was something colder and heavier settling into my chest, something with real weight to it, the specific and terrible clarity of watching a wall you trusted give way in slow motion and understanding. Finally, exactly what's about to come down. What do we do? I asked. Exactly what I tell you, in exactly the order I tell you, Emma said, and something in her voice had shifted into a register I hadn't heard from her before, controlled, precise, entirely without mercy. First, you stay with me. No calls to Paige beyond what's normal, nothing that signals anything's changed. Second, I'm getting you in front of an independent neuropsychologist here in Kansas City this week, someone with no connection to Tulsa, no connection to anyone in this, someone whose findings can't be questioned in any courtroom. We get you evaluated clean and on record before anyone files anything against you. And then? And then, Emma said, we build the case properly, and we let them walk right into it. The evaluation took place that Friday, 3 hours with a soft-spoken neuropsychologist named Dr. Renata Alvarez, in an office overlooking the Country Club Plaza, a battery of tests that felt, frankly, almost insulting in their simplicity, remembering lists of words, drawing clock faces, counting backward by sevens, except I understood, sitting there, that the insult was the entire point. I needed a record so clean and so thorough that nobody could ever again suggest otherwise. Dr. Alvarez met with Emma afterward while I waited, and when Emma came back out to the waiting room, her face had something in it I hadn't seen since this whole thing started, something close to relief, edged with fury. She says you tested in the top percentile for your age bracket, Emma said. Her exact words were that whatever anyone tries to claim about your mental state, there is no clinical ground to stand on. None. Over the next 11 days, Emma worked with a focus and precision that reminded me, in its own strange way, of watching a good crew run a job site, every piece moving exactly when it needed to, nothing wasted. She filed a preemptive petition in Tulsa County establishing my full legal competency, Dr. Alvarez's report attached and certified. She forwarded the toxicology results and the blister pack to the Oklahoma Department of Human Services Adult Protective Services Division, and the case was escalated immediately to the Tulsa Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, where a detective named Marcus Whitfield took it on a patient, unhurried man, the kind who builds a case the way I used to build a foundation, one verified layer at a time. She traced Gerald Voss's history through public court records, and found what she expected to find: 2 prior guardianship petitions in Oklahoma, flagged for irregularities by the state's own Elder Protective Services office, a pattern the state had noted but never successfully prosecuted. She filed a formal complaint against him with the Oklahoma Bar Association, attaching everything. And she found Cole's bank records not illegally, she was careful to explain to me, but through a public civil judgment that had been filed against him the previous summer, a debt from a failed drywall subcontracting venture that had left him owing nearly $60,000 to suppliers and creditors. A debt that had simply, mysteriously, gone quiet sometime in January, paid off or paused by someone. Through it all, I kept calling Paige every few days, kept my voice light, Kept telling her the pilot light situation had turned into a whole furnace inspection. Kept telling her I was taking my drops just like she'd asked. Feeling something twist in my stomach every time I said it, and heard the warmth in her voice on the other end, unchanged, unknowing. Let her believe it, Emma told me. Because here is what I want you to understand about the people who do this: they never think about what happens if the person they've underestimated turns out not to be so easily fooled. My granddaughter, and whoever stood behind her, forgot something essential about the family she came from. She forgot that her great-grandmother on my side outlived 2 husbands and buried them both without shedding a public tear, and that I did not build a company from one rented backhoe by being a man who gives up easy. On the morning of the 22nd day, I woke at Emma's place before sunrise, and made coffee in her kitchen, and stood at the window watching the sky go from black to gray to a thin, cold blue. "You ready?" Emma asked, coming in behind me in her robe, hair still loose from sleep. "More than ready," I said. The plan, when she laid it out, was almost simple in its architecture, the way the best structural solutions always are. I would call Paige and tell her I needed the family together, all of them, Derek and Cole included, to go over some paperwork my attorney had flagged regarding the house. Something about updating the deed now that Marion had been gone a few years. Nothing alarming. Nothing that would spook anyone. Just an old man being thorough about his affairs. Paige agreed before I'd even finished the sentence. Warm and immediate. Said, of course. Said, come for dinner. Said she'd make the pot roast I liked. I drove back to Broken Arrow that Saturday afternoon in a suit I hadn't worn since Marion's funeral, because I wanted, in some way I couldn't entirely explain even to myself, to meet this moment dressed like it mattered. Because it did. Emma left an hour ahead of me in her own car. She had 2 stops to make, she said, and didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. I arrived at the house on Chestnut Ridge Court at 4 o'clock exactly. The welcome y'all sign was still swinging gently by the door. Paige answered before I'd even knocked, pulled me into a hug, told me I looked handsome, asked if I wanted sweet tea. Just water, I said. Thank you, sweetheart. She didn't flinch, not even a flicker. That, more than almost anything else, is the detail that has stayed with me. Derek and Cole were in the living room, both rising when I came in. That same careful, managed warmth I now understood for exactly what it was: not respect, but management, the practiced handling of a man they believed was slowly slipping away from himself. "Walt, good to see you, buddy," Cole said, shaking my hand with both of his. And I looked at this man I'd known for less than a year and thought about $60,000 of debt disappearing sometime around January. "So," Derek said, settling into his chair with an easy confidence I recognized now as the confidence of a man who believed he held every card at the table. "Paige said something about the deed?" "My attorney flagged a few things," I said. "About the estate." A small silence. Derek's smile held, but something behind his eyes shifted, just slightly, the way a needle shifts when a gauge first starts to read wrong. The doorbell rang. I watched my granddaughter's face as Emma walked through that front door in a charcoal coat, a leather folder under one arm, and I have to tell you, in 68 years of living, I have witnessed very few things as unforgettable as watching that room understand, all at once and without a single word being spoken, exactly what was happening to it. Paige's smile did not collapse so much as it seemed to drain, color and warmth leaving her face in stages, like a light dimming on a slow circuit. Derek half rose from his chair, and then sat back down, as if his legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold him. Cole looked at the door, then at me, then at the door again, his jaw working around words that weren't coming. Emma walked into that room like she owned every square foot of the floor. "Paige," she said. Just the name, flat and final, like a door closing. "Emma? What? What is this?" Paige looked from her cousin to me, and I saw something desperate flicker across her face, something that wanted, even then, to still be innocent. "Grandpa Walt, what's going on?" "She's my attorney," I said. "Among other things, she's always been." Emma set her folder on the coffee table and opened it without hurry, without theater, the way a person moves who has already won and simply needs the room to catch up. "The first document," she said, her voice level and cold as January, "is an independent toxicology report confirming that the sealed supplement bottle given to my uncle on March 14th contained a concentrated prepared and administered outside of any legitimate medical context. The lab's finding was, and I am quoting directly, consistent with a deliberate, sustained poisoning protocol. Paige made a small, broken sound and sat down hard on the arm of the sofa. The second document is a title and asset investigation commissioned in January by Gerald Voss, an attorney with a documented history of orchestrating predatory guardianship schemes against elderly individuals in this state, two of which have already been flagged by Oklahoma's own Elder Protective Services office. Cole had gone very still, staring at a point on the carpet somewhere past his own feet. The third, Emma said, is a fully certified neuropsychological evaluation, dated 11 days ago, establishing my uncle's complete legal competency beyond any reasonable dispute. She let the silence sit there a moment. Let it do its own work. So let's be very clear about what happened in this house, she said. You poisoned a competent, trusting man who drove 2 hours because his granddaughter asked him to. You did it to manufacture a record of decline so that a predatory attorney could take his house and everything he built out from under him while he was still alive to watch it happen. And the money to make Cole's convenient little debt problem disappear came from somewhere, didn't it, Derek? Derek stood up. Emma, just everyone needs to calm down. This isn't. Sit down, I said. I hadn't raised my voice. I didn't need to. Something in it must have carried the whole weight of everything I now understood, because he sat. I want a lawyer, Derek said, and I heard something leave his voice entirely, some managed confidence hollowing itself out until what remained sounded almost young, almost frightened. That's the first sensible thing anyone in this room has said today, Emma told him. I'd strongly encourage it. She looked at me and gave the smallest nod, and I took out my phone and called Detective Whitfield, who picked up on the first ring. We're ready, I said. They came without sirens. 2 unmarked cars pulling quietly into the driveway, 4 officers moving with the unhurried, procedural calm of people who understood that restraint carries more weight than spectacle ever could. Detective Whitfield introduced himself at the door, showed his credentials, walked into that living room like a man with nowhere else he needed to be. Paige was crying before he'd finished reading the first charge. Not performance. I'd seen her perform warmth and worry all weekend, and this was different. This was something coming apart at the seams all at once with nothing left to hold the pieces together. Cole wouldn't look at anyone, hands pressed flat against his knees like he was trying to keep himself from shaking apart. Derek stared at the floor and said nothing, and I understood, watching the particular quality of his silence, that someone had already coached him on exactly what not to say if this moment ever came. He had planned for the possibility of getting caught. That detail, more than almost any other, was the one that cost me something I don't think I'll ever fully get back. The handcuffs came out, and that's when Paige finally looked up. Not at Emma. At me, Grandpa. Her voice broke clean in half on the single word. I don't know what made me ask. Maybe 34 years of needing to understand exactly where a structure failed and why. Maybe something older than that, something that just needed to hear it said out loud. Why? I asked her. Just that. The room went completely still, and my granddaughter, 28 years old, standing in her own living room with an officer's hand on her arm, began to cry the way I hadn't seen her cry since she was a little girl who'd fallen off her bike on Terwilliger Boulevard and scraped both knees bloody. I didn't want to, Grandpa. I swear to God I didn't want to. Cole owed all this money, and Derek said if we didn't help him, he was going to lose everything. And Mr. Voss said it wasn't really, he said, you'd probably end up needing care soon anyway, that this way we could make sure it was handled right, that it wasn't like we were really hurting you. Look at me, I said. She looked at me. You measured 10 drops into my water with your own hands, I said, twice a day. You watched me get sick sitting at your kitchen table and you called it me being tired from the drive. That is not a mistake, Paige. That is a plan, and you sat across from me and executed it, and you need to own exactly what that is. She could not answer me. She was crying too hard. Paige Grady Renner, Derek Renner, and Cole Renner were each charged with felony elder abuse, criminal conspiracy, and administering a controlled substance with intent to cause physical or mental impairment. Gerald Voss was referred to the Oklahoma Bar Association for disbarment proceedings, and now faces his own separate criminal case for his role in orchestrating the scheme. When the house finally emptied out, it was just Emma and me standing in that living room, the pot roast Paige had promised still sitting untouched in the oven, filling the whole house with a smell that made the entire afternoon feel strange and unreal in a way I don't think I'll ever fully shake. I stood at the front window and looked out at Chestnut Ridge Court, at the welcome, y'all sign still swinging in the wind. And I thought about 22 days earlier, pulling into that driveway thinking about nothing more complicated than a favor for my granddaughter. Emma came and stood beside me. "The house is protected," she said quietly. "I've already filed everything with your regular attorney back in Tulsa. Nobody touches Terwilliger. Nobody touches a dime of what you built. It was never at risk. Not really. Not once we knew what we were dealing with." "I know," I said. "This was never about money for me, Uncle Walt. I want you to know that." "I know that too," I said, and I did. That was the whole difference, in the end, between the people who love you and the people who only love what you have. One of them looks at you across a table and sees a grandfather. The other looks at you and sees an estate. We walked out of that house together, and I pulled the door shut behind me without looking back at it, and the March air outside was cold and clean and honest in a way that felt, after 22 days, like the first real breath I'd taken. "There's a barbecue place on Cherry Street," I told her. "Best brisket in 3 counties. I think we've earned it." Emma laughed, full and unguarded. The first real laugh I'd heard from her since this whole thing started, and it landed somewhere deep in my chest and stayed there. The case went to trial that fall. I sat in the courtroom in the same suit I'd worn that Saturday afternoon and listened to a judge lay out, in the plain and careful language of the law, exactly what had been done to me, and exactly why it could not be allowed to stand. Paige received 2 years. Derek, 3.5. Cole, 2. Gerald Voss is still awaiting his own trial as I sit here telling you this. I did not feel triumphant walking out of that courthouse, and I think you deserve the honest version of that rather than the satisfying one. You do not feel triumphant watching your granddaughter led away in handcuffs. What I felt instead was something heavier and, underneath the heaviness, something clean, the particular clarity of a man who has finally, completely, stopped being lied to by the people he trusted most. If somebody you love ever hands you something and asks you to trust them without asking any questions, ask the questions anyway. It doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you someone who's still paying attention. If this story meant something to you, tell me where you're watching from down in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.